Start the recording off with a swig. Oh man, that is dry as shit. All right, so the way that I kind of do things here when I am putting together the NFL market shares. The first thing that I do is I usually go in and I'm going to update the way that teams are passing and rushing and stuff like that, both in an adjusted script as well as in the red zone. So over here, we can see the pass percentages, which I update every single week based on a rolling scale of the last couple weeks. I use a recent sample. I also weight the season-long sample, but for the most part, I would rather use the recent sample because I want to catch what team they're doing. I also have the red zone percentages. So these are two different things. I'll open up my actual file here so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So this is a file that I actually use for myself. This contains all of the play data for the entire year. Pass splits, you can see here that I'm only using the first two quarters, the first half of every game. I'm using weeks 9 through 13, including weeks 9 and 13. And I'm only doing between the 20s. So that's what I use for my adjusted script. You can see that, pass heaviest are going to be Tampa Bay, Kansas City, and the Chargers. Pass lightest are going to be San Francisco, Philadelphia, and New England. And those things intrinsically make sense. For the goal line splits, I use all four quarters. I'm still using the same sample, but I'm only using within the red zone. Pass heaviest teams, the Chargers, Pittsburgh, and the Rams. Least pass heavy teams, Indianapolis and Arizona. And again, those things intrinsically make sense. But I use those as kind of like a base for when I'm building out what I want the algorithms to think the teams are going to be doing. So then I'm going to go and I'm going to update the Vegas information. So I just put in some Vegas info. I get it from Vegas Insider, which is reliable enough. But it just puts it together so that I have the current spread, the current total. Then I have percent of bets on the under and percent of bets on the over. I care about that stuff more for betting, not necessarily for the models, but I digress. I go into the Vegas baselines, and this pulls everything together. So this is taking the teams on the slate, and then it'll pull in what their spread is, what their over-under is, and then it's going to calculate out using some other math. It calculates out the total plays. It calculates out the amount of plays that each team should have of the total plays in the game. And then it's going to pull in the pass and rush splits based on the recent sample that I showed you guys earlier. And then it is going to apply the pass and rush splits against the team's total plays. I do also have a little bit of math in here, a little bit of math magic that will take this pass split and the rush split against team total plays, but it also cares about the spread. So, we have, let's see, what's a good example of this? So, Buffalo are 3.5-point underdogs with a 70% pass rate, right? The Chargers have a 72% pass rate, but are 10-point favorites. So, well, no. I mean, I guess it's better to do Kansas City because they're closer. So, Kansas City has a total of 62 team plays. Buffalo has a total of 64 team plays. The pass rates are relatively similar, but you can see that Buffalo's implied for 6 more passing plays than Kansas City is. Even though they have similar team plays, they have similar pass rates, and it's because Buffalo's a 3.5-point underdog. Kansas City is a 9.5-point favorite. So when I'm building this out, I want to make sure to account for teams that should be in a passing script later in the game, assuming that they are underdogs and that they should be trailing later on in the game. I then break down total touchdowns, and then I break that down based on the red zone pass and rush splits. So Kansas City, who has a very high red zone pass rate, the Chargers, who have a very high red zone pass rate, they're going to be implied for a lot more passing touchdowns based on their total touchdown breakdown. A team like Washington is only implied at 1.08 passing touchdowns and 1.38 rushing touchdowns because they're more run heavy in the red zone. So that's how I kind of break down the team level of things. So after we do the team level things is really, really important because the market shares that you have on all of the players and the baselines that you have for all the players in those baselines, that is going to pull from the team level of things. So with, say, the Chargers, right? Like, they're implied for 2.27 passing touchdowns and only 0.69 rushing touchdowns. So, like, let's go take a look at them in the master market shares really quick. And, like, this is everything that I work with every single week. Considering that that they're implied for more passing touchdowns than they are rushing touchdowns, let's see what Austin Eckler's projection is right now. Like, obviously, I haven't touched any of this stuff yet, but he's currently implied for 71% of the rushing touchdowns and 15% of the passing touchdowns. So that gives him a projection of 18.76. If I take this and I flip them, right? Like, he's projected for 18.76 right now with 71% of the rushing touchdowns and 15% of the receiving touchdowns. But if I flip that and give him 15% of the rushing touchdowns and 71% of the receiving touchdowns, his projection goes way up. So he's sitting at a projection of 48 now instead of 18. So that's why this kind of thing matters a lot. Like, if he's implied for basically 70% of the total receiving touchdowns, that's receiving target. Hold on. I messed that up. Okay. So he's implied for 71% of the rushing touchdowns. He has a projection of 18.76. That I was giving him 71% of the receiving market share, which is that means he would have had 71% of the total receiving production for the team, which is wrong. But if I give him instead, so it's 71-27 right now. If instead I go 27 and 71 here, then we see that his projection goes up to 23. So he gains an extra 5 points if we flip those things. And that's because this team is implied for more receiving touchdowns and more passing touchdowns than they are rushing touchdowns. So that kind of logic applies all the way across. Like, if we go back over to the Team Vegas projections, so right now he's projected for 23. If we change this, right, so the Chargers, if we change it to where they're more of a 50-50 split, like, that is going to make it... Oh, wait, no. I would have to change it to... I'd have to go change their red zone stuff. So if I go change the red zone percentages right now, we're just leaving it based on his actual sample right now, which is 71-27. So he's projected for 18. The reason why he's projected for 18 is because they are more pass heavy in the red zone, so that 27% has more weight. If I go into the red zone percentages and I change this to where it's, let's call it 40-60. Let's say that they are more rush heavy in the red zone. 40-60. So if we change that and then we go back into the master market shares, now you can see that it has a projection of almost 22 because now the rushing touchdowns have a higher weight than the receiving touchdowns. So that's the kind of thing that matters, and that's one of the things. It's why I focus so much on building out the adjusted baselines for the team level. The team level matters a lot because after we change all of the market shares for the players and after we go in and we figure all that kind of stuff out, it's going to be pulling directly from the team level of stuff. So that's kind of how we have the interaction between teams and players. So again, if you guys have questions, please do ask. I'm happy to answer pretty much anything about this kind of stuff right now. I'll probably go through and do a slight example of breaking down an actual team. I'll do a couple teams, right? As you can see here, I don't know if you guys can see it super well, but this I have a sum if of all of the players and all of the teams broken down. So this kind of just lets me know what teams I've finished. When we see that there are massive differences, like Carolina here, only 25% of the receiving touchdown aggregate is accounted for on the team right now. Only 64% of the receiving yardage aggregate is accounted for right now. That likely means there's a naming discrepancy. So if I go down and I look into Carolina, DJ Moore is not being accounted for, and I change DJ Moore every single week. There are plenty of teams and plenty of names that I have to go in and I have to change it because naming conventions are stupid in the NFL and even worse in other sports for sure. But still have to go through and like change them on specific range shell sheets. So after I go in and change that, then it's going to update and then it's going to pull in the new information. Then it's going to populate. So DJ Moore has gotten 75% of the red zone action for the Panthers over the last couple weeks. So now when we go and we see, okay, cool, that's all taken care of. We're still missing around 10% of the receiving percentage aggregate, and then we'll fix that. So Green Bay, a running back is missing. Indianapolis, wide receiver is missing. That's Michael Pittman Jr. The Rams, Darrell Henderson is missing, as well as Van Jefferson Jr. So, like, I know that as I go through all of this, I am eventually going to have all of this equal 100% all the way across. So I'm going to go into every single team, and I'm going to change the rush and receiving aggregates and, like, the market shares for every single different player, and I'm going to make it add up to 100%. So let's go through and do a couple of these teams. Let's start with Atlanta. So Atlanta, Calvin Ridley is obviously out. Like we're gonna go in really quick and we're just gonna go look really quick and see who is out for each individual team. So if we're doing Atlanta, go to Atlanta and we'll see. Okay, AJ McCarron's on IR. That doesn't really matter. Nobody is on IR or out for running backs. Calvin Ridley continues to be out. So one thing that I do need to do every single week as well is go into the inactives and put in who is going to be inactive so that it doesn't pull in their market shares for the team here. After that, it's all manual. So I know based on the last couple weeks and the recent sample that this is kind of what we're looking at. We're seeing that Mike Davis has around this market share for rushing and receiving. I guess I'll actually just zoom in on this here. Make it a little bit easier to see. Matt Ryan is around this rate. Cordero Ellison is around this rate. Cordell Patterson is around this rate. But, like, I want to know last week as well. So one thing that I always do is I always go into the tool on the site and I use the air yards and the rushing opportunity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look up Atlanta. I'm going to look up attempt percentages. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to say, okay, so do these things make sense? Over the last couple weeks, we've seen Matt Ryan around that 13% rate. We've seen Mike Davis around that 16 to 18% rate. Cordell Patterson, every week that he's playing, is somewhere in that 60% range. Quadri Olison is seeing a little bit more work lately. But these are pretty much in line, right? So Mike Davis is going to be around 18 to 20%. Cordell Patterson around 55%. Whatever the running back 3 is going to be, whether it's Wayne Gallman or it's Quadri Olison, is going to be in that 10 to 15% range, and then Matt Ryan is going to clean up the rest. So that makes sense. And then I'm going to go in, and I'm just going to make sure that those things stick. So Cordero Patterson should probably get a little bit of an upgrade here. Quadri Olison should probably get a little bit of a downgrade here. Mike Davis is probably fine around 20%. So I know that I want Cordero Patterson around 55%. And that's going to drop down Quadri Olison down to around the 15% range. And here I have 101%. So we'll probably just remove Olmide Zacchaeus just because, whatever, man. He doesn't need to have 1% of that. And then the rushing touchdown stuff. So this one's a little bit more squirrely. I'm still going to want to go into the rushing opportunity and then go look at the red zone attempt percentage. And then we'll kind of look, but this one is a lot more squirrely just because there are teams that don't have a lot of equity in the red zone period. So, like, it can be really, really up and down. We know intrinsically that Cordell Patterson is going to be kind of like the top dog. So he has 75 there, he has 71 there, he has 100% there. There are weeks where he has a little bit less, but Mike Davis has been completely overtaken by Cordell Patterson since week 7. We see sometimes that Mike Davis has a little bit more, but most of the time it's going to be Cordell Patterson. So we'll go back in to this, and we'll say that we're probably going to give Cordell Patterson somewhere around 50%. Just jump him up. We'll jump up Mike Davis a little bit more. Probably just give him the rest. And as you can see, like when we're changing these, this changed from 13% to 16%. So Mike Davis at 16% projects for 6.73. If I drop this down to 13%, it just drops him down to, yeah, it doesn't even affect him. He's still around 6.73. These jumps have to be quite drastic because Atlanta is very, very pass heavy in the red zone. So any of these small changes are not going to make a lot of difference. So we'll just jump him back up to 16%. It doesn't affect his projection nearly at all. It's pretty much negligible. The things that do matter here are going to be receiving touchdown, receiving rates, stuff like that. So we still know that Cordell Patterson has a pretty decent market share of the air yards and of the receiving yards. So same thing. I'm going to want to go into the air yard search. Let's refresh this. And we're going to go to the team comp. We're going to go Atlanta. We're going to look at the target percentage. So Russell Gage sitting around 30%. Over the last 3 weeks, he's been 25 to 30%. That's been great. Kyle Pitts been between 17 and 21%, so we'll give him somewhere around 18 and 19% probably. Mike Davis sitting in this like 10 to 15% range. Tajay Sharp around in the same range. We've actually seen a little bit less overall from Cordell Patterson. I mean, I know that he missed that week, but he hasn't been up in that 18% range. So I'm probably fine just giving him around the same as I give Mike Davis. And then these guys, Quadri Ellison and Keith Smith, those guys you're not going to play in DFS anyway. Like, it doesn't even matter. Keith Smith being between like a 4 and 7%. There's somebody called Parker Hesse who might have like 3% of the targets, but they're completely negligible. They don't even matter. I understand that from a real accurate, precise projecting person perspective, maybe I should project him for that 3%. But frankly, it doesn't matter. Unless somebody goes down, Parker Hesse is not going to matter literally at all. So I don't really bother projecting him. It doesn't really matter all that much. I would rather just leave things to the players that actually matter. So we'll go back in. Cordell Patterson receiving touchdowns. He's still probably going to be somewhere around 10 to 15%. We think that he's probably going to be somewhere between 13 and 15. So I'm fine leaving that there. These guys who have 10% receiving share, like Mike Davis, I probably even want to jump this up a little bit. And then give him a little bit of the receiving touchdowns. He's probably not going to have much. So we'll just cut his receiving target percentage in half. Russell Gage is obviously going to be the main guy for sure. Bump him up to even things out. We can probably, though, drop down Olamide Zacchaeus, right? He's likely not going to have 38% of the receiving touchdowns. From what we know about Kyle Pitts, he likely is going to be somebody who benefits more in the red zone than Olamide Zacchaeus is. So we're going to drop down Olamide Zacchaeus, not a whole bunch because he is getting red zone targets. But I want to drop him down to maybe 20%. And then we'll see what that does. So now I have 21% to work with. I want to move Kyle Pitts up into that 20% as well. And then we have another 5% to give away. Okay, we'll give a little bit to Quadri Ellison. He can account for 2% of the receiving touchdowns. Cordell Patterson, we know they like to use in the red zone, so let's just give him the last 3%. And then that'll round out the projections for Atlanta. As you can see, we have 100% across the board. Touch of Sharp is mostly a non-factor. Quadri Ellison, mostly a non-factor. I could change Frank Darby's name to... Who was it? It's fucking Parker Hesse. I could change his name to Parker Hesse and the projection would likely be the same, but we know who the major players are here. We know that the best projection is going to be Cordell Patterson because he has such a large market share of the rush yards, rushing touchdowns, and receiving yards. Next up is going to be Russell Gage, projecting for 13.8. Then it's going to be Kyle Pitts, projecting for around 12, which is still okay for a tight end. And then Olamide Zacchaeus and Mike Davis are going to project as like the last usable pieces, really, of Atlanta. Olamide Zacchaeus at 8, depending on what his price is, probably would project as like an okay value. But outside of that, you're mostly just looking at Cordell Patterson projecting for 17, and then Russell Gage at 13 and Kyle Pitts at 12. So that's kind of how we go through things. Let's break down a team that is a little bit more fun to project, I guess. Okay, let's go do Tampa Bay, because I typically get questions about Chris Godwin, and I want to show why Chris Godwin never projects well for me. So for Tampa Bay, we're pretty much already set here, right? Like, we're already accounting for 82% of the rush yards and 91% of the rushing touchdowns. It's mostly just Leonard Fournette. We see that we're missing Ronald Jones second here. So I always know that I just need to go in and fix him. Match the entire cell content. So we can go that. Yep. So that should bring us up, yeah, just about right. We'll probably just give Ronald Jones a little bit more. Give him like 17. We'll go 66 with Leonard Fournette. Just round things out. So we're already good here. And then when we look at the receiving stuff, so we're at 102% here with a little bit more than we should have. We'll probably want to drop down Cameron Brate, right? Like, Cameron Brate's not actually going to project for 22% of the total receiving touchdowns for the Bucs. He's likely going to be down here. We'll give him 12 for now, and then we'll see how things look. So we have 8 to give. Mike Evans, we know that he profiles as somebody who is more valuable in the red zone. We know that he has touchdown equity, so we're going to give him that 8%. It's going to jump up to 15%. So now, when we look at this, the thing that stands out to most people here, when we're looking at the projections, is that Chris Godwin only projects for 14. Leonard Fournette projects for 25. And that's a little bit jarring at first, for sure. But, like, this is what Tampa Bay has been recently. If you are looking at the recent sample, Leonard Fournette should have by far the highest projection for anybody on Tampa Bay, because his workload has been fantastic. He's had a great rushing touchdown equity. Tampa Bay are large favorites. So again, remember, if we go in and we see that Tampa Bay is sitting here, they're not actually large favorites. They're 3.5-point favorites. I was thinking of the Chargers. But they're projected for only 20 rushing attempts. In those 20 rushing attempts, Leonard Fournette is projecting for 2/3 of those. So he's projecting for 16 rushing attempts, projecting for nearly all of the rushing touchdown equity. He's still projecting for 20% of the total passing touchdowns received and 20% of the total receiving targets over the last 4 weeks. That's really, really good. But Chris Godwin only projects for like 15. So the reason for that is because of his ADOT. So if we go into the air yard search again, right? We're going to pull this up. And we're going to look at Tampa Bay. So first we'll look at the target percentage. Like, Chris Godwin has been really, really good without Antonio Brown in some stretches. Like, we see Rob Gronkowski get up there. We see Mike Evans get up there. We see Chris Godwin get up there. Like, they kind of trade places a little bit. But if we look at the ADOT for Chris Godwin is typically really, really low. We're looking at an ADOT of 5 here, 5 here, 5 here, 5 here, 4.4 here. Like, his ADOT is so low that it's super difficult to try to project him for anything more than basically 5 yards per catch. Sure, there can be yards after catch and stuff like that. But for the most part, the reason why I wrote last week, and I'll put myself up here, the reason why I wrote last week for somebody like Chris Godwin, the way that he has to get there, if he doesn't have 10 plus catches in a game, like, his yardage totals are just not going to be all that good. If we go over and we look in the weekly baselines, which this is after everything has been built up. And actually, I can just... Okay, so Chris Godwin here. It's projected for 7.72. We'll zoom in here. 7.22 receptions at 5.05 yards per reception. That only gives him, 36 receiving yards and half a touchdown. So that's where his projection is coming from. If you change his ADOT and say 10, obviously that's going to make his projection significantly better. So now he projects for 17 because he projected for 72 yards. But that's an unrealistic projection to make, right? The more realistic projection is 14. The more realistic projection for somebody like, who has a really high ADOT here? Yeah, so for Stephon Diggs, right? Like, Stephon Diggs has an 11 yards per reception. So him having 8 receptions for 91 yards, that makes him look a lot better than somebody like Chris Godwin. Hi. Oh my god, wait.
Do you have a whole bottle of wine in here?
I do have a whole bottle of wine in here.
That's...
I only did it so that I could pour while I was doing it.
That's a bit excessive, but okay. Anyway, say goodnight.
This is the baby. He's going to say goodnight. Goodnight, Damascus. Alright, I love you both. I'll be done soon. They say hello as well, Zach. So as you can see, like, ADOT matters a lot. It's why when I get those kind of like weirdo projections, that's the reason why. Like, Deebo Samuel, he projects pretty badly, mostly just because he only has 4 receptions. But his ADOT is really good. His ADOT is 12. So if you ramp this up to, say, like, 7 projections... Wait, I did that wrong. If you ramp that up to, say, like, 7 receptions, right? That jumps him up to 80 yards. And then his projection actually looks pretty damn good for 19, right? Not projected for any receiving touchdowns, but, I mean, that's something that I need to go fix. But that's kind of how the projections are built up. So after I go through in the master market shares and I say, okay, so it's probably fair to say that Chris Godwin has somewhere around a 21% receiving target percentage. I guess that you could say more if you want to. Maybe we can take a little bit away from Fournette. Like, let's say that this jumps up to 24%. We drop this down to like 17%. Gives Chris Godwin now a projection of around 16, and Leonard Fournette drops down 2 points because now obviously he's going to have less receptions, less receiving equity. But like, as you can see, whenever somebody who has a really low ADOT gets projected, it's going to really hurt their expectation. And remember that what we're looking at here is we're trying to avoid variance. So somebody that has a lot of yards after catch, that's typically going to be somebody who my model doesn't like very much. If they're going up against a team that ends up, tackling them at the point of catch, like we want to avoid somebody who has a lot of yards after catch because that's variance, it's introduced variance. It also speaks to avoiding the variance of like long touchdown catches, right? So a lot of the receiving touchdown equity that I project in goes off of those red zone numbers, because that's where like 97% of the receiving touchdowns in the NFL come from are in the red zone. So projecting anything outside of that is silly. You're projecting already for a very volatile thing, trying to predict the future, and then you're saying, oh, well, now I'm also going to introduce this thing that's a 3% chance. Like, it's just not likely. So clearly TD should just be rammed. Yeah, it's pretty close. Even as you can see, like, we go in and, there's some teams, like, look at Tennessee. Receiving touchdown percentages, it's fucking, like, it's spread out across the board. A team like Washington, absolutely spread out across the board. So, stuff like that, I mean, if nearly everybody has about the same chance of a receiving touchdown, like, that's just, it is a lot of variance, for sure. Even when you look at teams that are, like, relatively condensed, somebody like the Jets, right? It's still only a 30%. It's still only 30% of the total receiving touchdowns, 28% of the total receiving touchdowns. So, but yeah, that's pretty much it. I just kind of wanted to go in a little bit and talk about the projection process and talk a little bit about how I distribute market shares and like the process behind that. Just to like clear up some questions on how the projections are built out. As you can see, like a lot of this system is trying to avoid variance and it's trying to avoid guys that are getting there based on variance. You know, we want to focus on the guys that are getting there with the most probable outcomes. So Damascus is going to sleep now, so I need to be quiet while I drink the rest of my wine. But thank you guys for hanging out and listening. If you guys have questions, then feel free to ask in the Discord. And if you don't, then I'll talk to you guys tomorrow when we do the Saturday stream. As always, thank you guys for tuning in, and I will talk to you later.